After the Portuguese reached the Maluku Islands of Indonesia in 1511, the earliest documented European expedition to the Philippine archipelago was led by the Portuguese navigator Ferdinand Magellan in the service of King Charles I of Spain in 1521. After Magellan's expedition, 4 more expeditions were made to the islands. They were led by Garcia Jofre de Loaisa in 1525, Sebastian Cabot in 1526, Alvaro de Saavedra in 1527, and Ruy Lopez de Villalobos in 1542. Since none of the expeditions after Magellan from Loaisa to Villalobos had succeeded in taking over the Philippines, King Charles I stopped sending colonizers to the islands. However, when Philip II succeeded his father to the throne, he instructed Luis de Velasco, the Viceroy of Mexico, to prepare a new expedition, to be headed by Miguel Lopez de Legaspi. Lopez de Legaspi succeeded in colonizing the country. If you are new to my channel, please subscribe and click the notification bell so that you will not miss any of my new videos. Ferdinand Magellan, a Portuguese in the service of the Spanish crown, left Spain on September 20, 1519 with the goal of finding a western route to the Moluccas, Spice Islands, and trade for spices. He sailed across the Atlantic, and discovered the strait that now bears his name, allowing him to pass through the southern tip of South America into the Pacific Ocean, which he named. The fleet performed the first ever crossing of the Pacific. On March 16, 1521, they landed on Hominhan Island in Samar. Magellan named the islands Las Islas de San Lazaro, St. Lazarus Islands, because they reached the islands on the feast day of St. Lazarus of Bethany. However, the archipelago was renamed Las Islas de Poniente, Islands to the West. Various sources claimed that Magellan was not the one who renamed the area, but his chroniclers instead. The name came from the fact that the islands were reached from Spain en route approaching the left part of the globe. Conversely, the Portuguese called the archipelago Ilhas do Oriente, Islands to the East, because they approached the islands from the east of Portugal in the late 1540s. Magellan was the first European to reach the islands. He forged a close friendship with Raja Humaban, the chieftain of Limasawa. Humaban was a rival of one of the chiefs on Mactan Island, Datu Lapu-Lapu. Another chief in Mactan, Datu Zula, was also wary of Lapu-Lapu. Magellan promised to eliminate the king, who would not recognize the superiority of Spanish crown. On April 17, 1521, Magellan sailed to Mactan and ensuing battle killed Magellan by the natives led by Lapu-Lapu. Juan Sebastian de Elcano, the master of ship Concepcion, took over the command of the expedition after the death of Magellan and captained the ship Victoria back to Spain. Out of the 5 ships and more than 300 men who left on the Magellan expedition in 1519, only 1 ship, the Victoria, and 18 men returned to Seville, Spain on September 6, 1522. Nevertheless, the said expedition was considered historic because it marked the first circumnavigation of the globe and proved that the world was round. Loaisa's expedition was conceived both as a rescue mission and a voyage of discovery. The Victoria, a vessel from Magellan's expedition to the Pacific, had returned to Spain in 1522 with word that her sister ship the Trinidad had last been seen attempting to return home by sailing east from the Spice Islands to South America. Loaisa was ordered to seek Trinidad, or news of her fate, by voyaging along her expected return route to Spain. He was also ordered to locate and colonize Magellan's Spice Islands. For this purpose, Loaisa was assigned 7 vessels and a total of 450 men including tradesmen and administrators for the Spice Islands settlement. The expedition set sail from Corona on July 24, 1525. Loaisa was named captain along with Juan Sebastian Elcano, who had reached the Spice Islands in 1521 during the Magellan expedition. The fleet headed southwest to the Canary Islands and then south along the African coastline. In November 1525 Loaisa moved west across the Atlantic to Brazil, reaching the Patagonian shore in January 1526. There was no sign of Trinidad, and Loaisa decided to abandon the search for her and continue instead to the Spice Islands. However, the weather was poor, and over the next several weeks, in high winds while trying to enter the Strait of Magellan, the ships alternately gathered and dispersed. 2 ships were wrecked, and 1 tacked into the Atlantic and deserted the expedition. On May 26, 1526, this diminished fleet of 4 ships passed through the strait and entered the Pacific. The bad weather which had originally scattered Loaisa's fleet continued in the Pacific. The 4 remaining vessels quickly lost sight of each other in the heavy rain and were unable to regroup when the storm finally passed on June 1. Santa Maria de la Victoria was the only ship left. Loaisa himself died of scurvy on July 30, 1526, Elcano a few days later. Alonso de Salazar took command after the deaths of Loaisa and Elcano. After 1 month of holding the command, he also died of scurvy shortly after having left Guam on September 5, 1526 and was succeeded by Martin Iniguez de Carquezano. Iniguez reached the islands of Visayas and Mindanao in the Philippines and the Moluccas, but died of food poisoning. Only Andres de Urdaneta and 24 other men survived to land in the Spice Islands. They returned to Spain in 1536 in the Portuguese India Armada and under Portuguese guard to complete the Second World Circumnavigation in history. Sebastian Cabot was a Venetian explorer. He was the son of Venetian explorer John Cabot. After his father's death, Cabot conducted his own voyages of discovery, seeking the Northwest Passage through North America for England. He later sailed for Spain. On March 4, 1525, Cabot was given command of a Spanish fleet that was to determine from astronomical observation the precise demarcation of the Treaty of Tordesillas, which defined the area of Spanish and Portuguese monopolies. He was also to convey settlers to the Molucca Islands in the Pacific, to strengthen Spanish claims in the Spice Islands. This expedition consisted of 4 ships with 250 men, and set sail from Sanlúcar de Barrameda on April 3, 1526. Cabot was directed to cross the Pacific twice and he might have accomplished a second circumnavigation of the world. However, when Cabot landed with his expedition in Brazil, he heard of the rumors of the great wealth of the Incan king and the nearly successful invasion of Alixo Garcia. He abandoned his charge and explored the interior of the Rio de la Plata along the northern border of present-day Argentina. In 1527, Hernán Cortés prepared a new expedition to search for the missing fleet of the Loaisa expedition and commissioned his cousin Álvaro de Saavedra to command the new expedition. However, the true purpose of the expedition was to find new lands in the South Sea, the Pacific Ocean, and to bring back spice plants. On October 31, 1527, they sailed from Zihuatanejo, Guerrero. On December 15, after having sailed 1,170 leagues, the Espiritu Santo and the Santiago swept on ahead, after a sudden squall, never to be heard of again. On February 2, 1528 the La Florida sighted the Philippines and the following day anchored at a small island off the north coast of Mindanao, after 95 days since its departure and having sailed 1,923 leagues. This makes Saavedra the first navigator to cross the Pacific Ocean from the Americas. On March 30, 1528 the La Florida arrived to Tito Rey, the Spanish stronghold in the Moluccas where the men remaining from the Loaisa expedition were found, and they joined them to fight the Portuguese in the neighboring Ternate. To carry out the instructions of the expedition and bring further assistance to the Spaniards in Tito Rey, Saavedra set sail for New Spain, Mexico, on June 14, 1528. However, they were diverted by the northeast trade winds and threw them back to the Moluccas, returning to Tito Rey on November 19, 1528. On May 3, 1529, Saavedra tried again the second time by navigating back down south. Again he toured the western part of New Guinea, then heading north. However, Saavedra died, thus, Pedro Lasso took command. They sailed north but did not find westerly winds. When Lasso died, they finally decided to turn around the ship and again return to the Moluccas, arriving to Halmahera next to Tidore on December 8, 1529. They were captured there by the Portuguese and held in captivity for 5 years. In 1534, the surviving 8 members of his crew made it back to Spain. Ruy López de Villalobos was commissioned in 1541 by the Viceroy of New Spain, Antonio de Mendoza, who was the first colonial administrator in the New World, to send an expedition to the Islas del Poniente, islands of the west. His fleet of 6 galleon ships left Barra de Navidad, Jalisco, Mexico with 370 to 400 men on November 1, 1542. López de Villalobos reached Mindanao on February 2, 1543. He established a colony in Sarangani but could not stay long because of insufficient food supply. In April 1544, he sailed for island of Amboyna. He and his crew members then made their way to the islands of Samar and Leyte, which he named Las Islas Filipinas, the Philippine Islands, in honor of the Prince of Spain, Philip II. Driven away by hostile natives, hunger, and a shipwreck, López de Villalobos was forced to abandon his settlements in the islands, and the expedition. He and his crew members sought refuge in the Moluccas, where they quarreled with the Portuguese, who imprisoned them. He died on April 4, 1544, in his prison cell on the island of Amboyna. López de Villalobos is remembered for naming the country Las Islas Filipinas, the Philippine Islands. Philip II became King of Spain on January 16, 1556 when his father, Charles I, abdicated both the Spanish and Holy Roman Empire thrones. Charles I of Spain was also Charles V of the Holy Roman Empire. The throne of the Holy Roman Empire went to Charles' brother, Ferdinand I. In 1559, Philip II ordered an expedition mounted to the Spice Islands, stating that its purpose was to discover the islands of the West. In reality, its task was to conquer the Philippine Islands for Spain. In 1564, López de Legaspi was commissioned by the Viceroy, Luis de Velasco, to lead an expedition in the Pacific Ocean, to find the Spice Islands where the earlier explorers Ferdinand Magellan and Ruy López de Villalobos had landed in 1521 and 1543, respectively. The Viceroy died in July 1564. But the Audiencia and López de Legaspi completed the preparations for the expedition. On November 20, 1564, 5 ships, carrying 500 soldiers, sailed from the port of Barra de Navidad, New Spain. Other sources give the date as November 1, 1564, and mention 4 ships and 380 men. López de Legaspi and his men sailed the Pacific Ocean for 93 days. On February 13, 1565, Legaspi's expedition landed in Cebu Island. The Legaspi expedition was successful as it established the first colony in the Philippines. It also resulted in the discovery of the return route to Mexico across the Pacific. This discovery started the Manila galleon trade, which lasted for 2.5 centuries. For 333 years, from 1565 when Spain first established a colony in the country until the Treaty of Paris on December 10, 1898, the Philippines was a colony of Spain. Please leave a comment below. If you find this video informative and helpful, please give it a like and share with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe and click the notification bell so that you will not miss any of our new videos. Thanks for watching.